He discovered an old well behind his house, climbed down, and what he saw changed him forever. But what Gideon Nash found in that hidden shaft would force him to question everything he'd believed about his family's legacy. The well had been concealed beneath years of overgrown brush and fallen timber, invisible until the recent storm cleared the land behind his homestead. When he first peered over the stone rim, expecting to see water reflecting the afternoon sky, he found something that made no sense. The bottom was dry, and scattered across the floor 20 feet below were objects that had no business being in a well. Children's toys. A little wooden horse, its paint faded by time. What looked like folded cloth. It was wrong. All of it was wrong. Gideon returned to his house, his heart pounding a strange rhythm against his ribs. He gathered a strong rope, his oil lamp, and enough nerve to investigate what shouldn't exist. Back at the well, he secured the rope around a sturdy oak and lowered himself into the stone-lined shaft. The air grew cold and smelled of damp earth and forgotten things. The walls weren't rough-hewn like a normal well. They showed chisel marks too precise, too deliberate. It was as if this place had been built for a different purpose entirely. His boots touched solid ground, and by the flickering lamplight, the truth became clear. A small dress, faded but carefully folded. A leather journal with pages that crumbled at his touch, and beneath it all, something that made him understand why this place had been hidden from the world. A collection of legal documents wrapped in oiled cloth, preserved against time and weather. He unwrapped them with trembling hands. Property deeds, bills of sale, names he recognized from the town records, names that told a story he'd never heard before. His own name appeared on these papers, his father's name, his grandfather's name. But so did others. Names that had been viciously crossed out in dark ink, signatures that had been deliberately obscured. The dates went back 40 years, to when this land had first been settled. Gideon's hands shook as he held up a letter written in a woman's careful script. The words were clear enough to read by lamplight. They came in the night, took everything. The children are hiding, but I fear it's too late. If anyone finds this, know that the Nash family built their fortune on stolen ground. Above him, he could hear the wind picking up, rustling through the timber that had hidden this place for decades. But down in this stone chamber, surrounded by the remnants of lives he'd never known existed, Gideon realized that everything he'd believed about his inheritance, his family, his very identity, had been a lie. The well wasn't just a hole in the ground, it was a grave for secrets. And now those secrets were staring back at him, demanding answers he wasn't sure he was ready to give. Gideon gathered the documents with shaking hands, his mind racing to make sense of the nightmare he'd uncovered. The leather journal fell open to a page that stopped his heart. It was a detailed map of his property, drawn in the same careful handwriting as the letter. But it showed buildings that no longer existed. A house where his barn now stood. A smaller cabin marked children's room near what was now his vegetable garden. This wasn't just stolen land. People had lived here. A family. Children had played right where he now planted corn. The thought made him sick. Then he heard it. A sound that echoed down the well shaft, growing closer by the second. Hoofbeats. Someone was coming. Gideon quickly rolled the papers together, stuffing them inside his jacket. He couldn't be found down here. Not with these documents, not with this evidence. He climbed fast, his boots scraping against the smooth stone walls, his lungs burning. By the time he hauled himself over the rim, gasping for air, a rider was already rounding the corner of his house. It was Mercy Whitmore. She sat straight in her saddle despite her 70-odd years, her sharp eyes scanning the disturbed brush around the well opening. "Afternoon, Gideon," she called out, but there was nothing casual in her tone. "Saw the storm damage from the road. Thought I'd check if you needed help clearing debris." Her gaze lingered on the pile of broken timber he'd moved to uncover the well. She knew. Somehow, this woman, who'd lived in town longer than anyone else alive, knew exactly what he'd found. Storm took down more than I expected, Gideon replied carefully, wiping dirt from his hands. The documents felt like they were burning a hole through his jacket. Nothing I can't handle. Mercy climbed down from her horse with the stiff movements of someone whose joints had seen too many hard winters. She walked directly to the well opening, peering down into the darkness as if she could see all the way to the bottom. "Funny thing about old wells," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper against the wind. "They tend to preserve things that were meant to stay buried, things that some folks would rather keep hidden forever." Gideon felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool afternoon air. He tried to keep his voice steady. "What kind of things?" She turned to face him, and her eyes held a knowledge that made his stomach clench into a tight, cold knot. "The kind that change a man's understanding of who he really is," she said. "The kind that make him question everything his family ever told him about how they built their life." The wind picked up again, sending dried leaves swirling around them in a chaotic dance. Mercy mounted her horse with deliberate slowness, giving him one last look that seemed to pierce straight through to the papers hidden against his chest. "Some secrets have a way of coming to light, Gideon," she said, her voice carrying a weight of warning, "whether we're ready for them or not." As her horse carried her back toward town, Gideon realized that his discovery was only the beginning. If Mercy knew about the well, about what it contained, then others might know too, and that meant his life, as he'd known it, was about to end. That evening, Gideon spread the documents across his kitchen table by lamplight, his coffee growing cold as he read through pages that rewrote his entire history. The property deed told a story that made his hands shake. The land hadn't been purchased by his grandfather, as he'd always believed. It had been acquired through what the papers called abandonment proceedings. The previous owners, the Brennan family, had simply failed to maintain residence. But the letter from Sarah Brennan told a different story, a story of terror. "The men came again today demanding we leave. They say we have no legal right to the land our family cleared and farmed for 8 years. Thomas tried to show them our original deed, but they laughed and tore it up. They give us until dawn to gather what we can carry." Gideon's throat tightened as he read the final lines, his vision blurring. "The children are too frightened to sleep. Little Mary keeps asking when we can come home. I don't have the heart to tell her we never will. If God grants us safe passage, we'll hide these papers in the old well. Perhaps someday someone will find them and know the truth about what happened here." The truth was worse than theft. It was erasure. The Brennan family had been driven off their own land and written out of history entirely. His grandfather's name appeared on documents dated just 3 days after Sarah Brennan's desperate letter, claiming the property as vacant and unimproved. A sharp knock at his door made Gideon's heart pound against his ribs. He quickly gathered the papers, shoving them into a wooden box he kept on the highest shelf in his closet. Through the window, he could see a tall figure silhouetted against the moonlight. "Mr. Nash?" The voice belonged to a younger man, someone unfamiliar. "Sorry to bother you so late. Name's Daniel Crane. I work for the Territorial Land Office." Gideon opened the door cautiously. The man wore a clean suit despite the dusty ride to his property, and his eyes held the sharp focus of someone accustomed to finding discrepancies in paperwork. "What brings you out here at this hour, Mr. Crane?" "We've received some inquiries about your property," Crane said smoothly. "Questions about the original ownership records. Seems there might be some documentation that's come to light recently." Crane's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I was hoping we could discuss your family's claim to this land. Make sure everything is properly documented." Behind Crane, Gideon could see 2 more riders waiting in the shadows, their forms still and menacing. This wasn't a routine visit from a land office clerk. This was something else entirely. "I'm afraid I don't understand what you mean by inquiries." Gideon said carefully, his hand tightening on the doorframe. Crane stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I think you understand perfectly, Mr. Nash. The question is, what you plan to do about it? Gideon kept his voice steady despite the fear crawling up his spine. I'm afraid you'll have to be more specific, Mr. Crane. My family has owned this land for 40 years. Everything is properly documented. Crane's smile widened, but his eyes remained as cold as a winter river. That's interesting, because we have reports of someone discovering items that might contradict those documents, items found in unusual places around your property. The two riders behind Crane moved closer, their hands resting casually on their gun belts. These weren't land office clerks, they were enforcers, and their presence meant this situation was far more dangerous than Gideon had realized. I don't know what you're talking about, Gideon said, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. But even as the words left his lips, he knew Crane didn't believe him for a second. See, that's where we have a problem, Crane said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. He didn't show it to Gideon, just held it. Because earlier today, someone reported seeing you emerge from an old well on your property, someone who's been watching this place for a very long time. Gideon's blood ran cold. Mercy Whitmore. She hadn't come to check on storm damage. She'd come to confirm what she already suspected, and then she'd gone straight to whoever was behind this visit. She had set him up. Now, I'm going to give you a choice, Crane continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, the friendly act completely gone. You can hand over whatever you found down there, and we can all pretend this conversation never happened. Or, we can tear this place apart until we find what we're looking for. One of the riders spat into the dirt, the sound sharp in the night air. And if I refuse both options? Gideon asked, his voice low. The rider spoke for the first time, his voice a gravelly threat. Then you might find yourself having an accident. Farming can be dangerous work. Lots of ways a man can get hurt working alone. Gideon realized he was trapped. These men weren't going to leave empty-handed, and they clearly had no intention of letting him live to tell anyone about their visit. But the documents upstairs contained the only evidence of what had really happened to the Brennan family. If he handed them over, the truth would disappear forever. Their memory would be erased for good. I need to think about this, Gideon said, playing for time. You've got until sunrise, Crane replied, his voice final. But understand something clearly. This land has been in the right hands for 40 years. Some people in town have worked very hard to keep it that way. They're not about to let some old papers change the natural order of things. As the three men rode away, their silhouettes swallowed by the darkness, Gideon noticed something that made his stomach clench. The rider who'd threatened him, the one with the gravelly voice, wore a deputy's badge, glinting in the moonlight. This wasn't just about covering up an old crime. This was about protecting people who were still in power, people who had built their positions on what happened to the Brennan family. His mind racing, Gideon turned and ran back inside, bolting the door. He had to get the documents. He had to run. He climbed the stairs to his room, his footsteps echoing in the silent house. He reached for the wooden box on the highest shelf of his closet, but his fingers found nothing but empty air. The box was gone. Gideon tore through his house like a man possessed. He ripped open every drawer, overturned his mattress, frantically checked every hiding place he could think of. He examined the floorboards for loose nails, searched the spaces behind furniture, his desperation growing with every empty space he found. The documents were gone, and with them, any proof of what had really happened to the Brennan family, any hope for justice. Someone had been inside his house while he was talking to Crane. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The conversation at his front door hadn't been a negotiation. It had been a distraction. a performance designed to keep him occupied while someone else slipped in through the back and searched his home. They'd known exactly where to look, which meant they'd been watching him much longer than he'd realized. They had watched him hide the box. A soft knock at his back door made him freeze, his blood turning to ice. This time the visitor wasn't bothering with the pretense of a social call. Through the kitchen window, he could see Mercy Whitmore standing alone in the moonlight. But her posture was different now. The frail old woman act was gone. She stood tall, replaced by someone who moved with purpose and authority. "You might as well let me in, Gideon," she called softly, her voice clear and strong. "We need to talk, and standing out here won't help either of us." Against his better judgment, he unbolted the door and opened it. Mercy stepped inside, her sharp eyes taking in the chaos he'd created in his frantic search for the missing papers. Her gaze was steady, unreadable. "Looking for these?" she asked. She reached into her heavy coat and pulled out the wooden box. She set it carefully on his kitchen table. "You took them," Gideon whispered, staring at the box as if it were a ghost. "I kept them safe," she corrected, her voice firm. "Do you have any idea what would have happened if Crane had found these documents? You'd be dead by morning, and these papers would be burned to ash. The truth would be gone forever." Gideon stared at her, his mind struggling to process this impossible turn of events. First, she had set him up. Now she was saving him. "Who are you?" he breathed. "Who are you really?" Mercy sat down heavily in one of his kitchen chairs, and for a moment, she suddenly looked every one of her 70 years. The strength seemed to drain out of her, replaced by a deep, ancient weariness. "I'm the only person left alive who remembers what really happened the night the Brennan family disappeared," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was 17 years old. I was working as a servant in the house of the man who ordered their removal." She opened the box and pulled out Sarah Brennan's letter, handling it with the reverence of someone touching a holy relic. "I was there when they planned it," she whispered. "I heard them laughing about how easy it would be to claim the land once the family was gone, and I saw them burn the original deeds that proved the Brennans' rightful ownership." "Why didn't you say something?" Gideon demanded, his voice cracking. "Why didn't you tell someone what happened?" Mercy's laugh was a bitter, broken sound. "Tell who, Gideon? The sheriff, who helped plan the whole thing? The judge, who signed the abandonment papers without a second thought? The banker, who provided the money to buy off the territorial officials?" She gestured toward the darkness outside, toward the town that lay sleeping, ignorant of the rot at its core. Half the powerful families in this territory built their wealth on what happened that night. You think they'd let one 17-year-old servant girl destroy everything they've worked to protect? Gideon felt the room spinning around him. The conspiracy was bigger, deeper than he could have ever imagined. "Then why?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Why are you helping me now?" Mercy looked up at him, and her eyes were filled with a sorrow so profound it stole his breath. "Because Sarah Brennan saved my life that night," she whispered, a single tear tracing a path through the wrinkles on her cheek. "And because her daughter is still alive." Gideon stared at Mercy, his mind reeling from her revelation. It was too much to take in, too much to believe. Alive? Sarah Brennan's daughter is still alive? After 40 years? Mercy nodded slowly, her weathered hands trembling slightly as she held the documents. "Mary Brennan. She was only 6 years old the night they came. Sarah hid her in the root cellar while the men searched the house." Her voice dropped, the memories pulling her back across the decades. "I was cleaning in the kitchen when I heard Sarah scream." She paused, her eyes distant, seeing a past that Gideon could only imagine. "They weren't just driving the family off the land, Gideon. They were making sure there would be no witnesses left to challenge their claim later. I saw one of them. I saw him raise his gun toward the cellar door, where little Mary was hiding." Gideon felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just about stolen land. It had been about murder from the very beginning. Sarah saw what was about to happen, Mercy continued, her voice thick with emotion. She grabbed a kitchen knife and went after the man. She fought him. In the struggle, she yelled for me to run, to take Mary and get away. She knew they'd kill me too for seeing what I'd seen. How did you escape? Gideon whispered. Sarah fought like a woman possessed. She bought me time, just enough time to get Mary out through the back of the cellar. We ran through the woods while the house burned behind us, lighting up the sky. Sarah never made it out. The weight of what Mercy was telling him settled on Gideon's shoulders like a crushing burden. His family's prosperity, his entire life, had been built on blood as well as theft, on the murder of a woman protecting her child. Where is Mary now? He asked, his voice hoarse. Mercy's eyes met his, and he saw a pain there that went deeper than old memories. She's been living in town all these years, took a different name after I brought her to the orphanage, grew up, married, had children of her own. She doesn't know the truth about what happened to her family or who she really is. Who is she? Gideon pressed, needing to know. Elena Morrison, Mercy said, the school teacher. Gideon's breath caught in his throat. He knew Elena Morrison. Of course he did. A quiet, gentle woman in her late 40s who taught the town's children and kept to herself. He'd spoken to her at church gatherings, at the general store. He had never once suspected that she was the rightful heir to the land he'd called home his entire life, the lost child from a forgotten tragedy. She has a birthmark on her left wrist, Mercy said quietly, as if offering proof, shaped like a crescent moon. That's how I've always known it was her, even after all these years. A sudden sound from outside made them both freeze. Hoofbeats, approaching fast. But this time, it was more than one rider, more than 3. Through the window, Gideon could see torches moving through the darkness, a swarm of angry fireflies. At least 6 men, maybe more, riding hard toward his house. They're coming back, he whispered, his voice tight with dread. Mercy quickly stuffed the documents back into the wooden box. They know I'm here. Someone must have been watching my house too. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a fierce, sudden determination. There's something else you need to know, Gideon, she said, her voice low and urgent. Your grandfather wasn't just part of this conspiracy. The sound of horses surrounding the house grew louder. He was the one who gave the order to kill Sarah Brennan. The riders surrounded the house before Gideon could even consider escape. Through the front window, he could see Crane dismounting, flanked by men whose faces were hidden in shadow. The deputy he'd noticed earlier now wore his badge openly, making no attempt to hide his involvement. He was here on official business, the town's business. Nash! Crane's voice cut through the night air, sharp and commanding. We know the old woman is in there with you. Time's up for playing games. Mercy gripped Gideon's arm, her fingers surprisingly strong for her age. Listen to me carefully, she hissed. They can't let either of us live now. We know too much. We can connect too many people. Then we tell them we'll keep quiet, Gideon said desperately. Give them the documents and promise to forget everything. You still don't understand. Mercy's voice was urgent, desperate. This isn't just about your grandfather anymore. The judge who signed those abandonment papers 40 years ago. He's still the judge, and he's Elena's father-in-law. The banker who financed the land grab. He's the current mayor, the original sheriff's son. He is that deputy standing outside your door right now. The full scope of the conspiracy hit Gideon like a physical blow. It wasn't just old crimes they were protecting. It was current power structures, family legacies, political positions that had been passed down from father to son. If the truth came out, it would destroy the entire social order that these families had built over 4 decades. It would burn their world to the ground. Nash, you've got 1 minute to come out here or we're coming in, Crane shouted, his voice laced with impatience. There's a back way out. Gideon whispered, thinking fast. Through the root cellar, same path you took with Mary all those years ago. Mercy shook her head, her expression grim. They'll have men positioned there too. They've had 40 years to think about how to handle this situation if it ever arose. They've planned for this. Through the back window, Gideon could see she was right. More torches flickered in the darkness behind his house, cutting off any possible escape route. They were trapped, and the men outside weren't planning to take prisoners. What about Elena? Gideon asked, a new fear gripping him. If they kill us, what happens to her? They'll probably leave her alone, as long as she never learns the truth, Mercy said. But if she ever finds out who she really is… Mercy didn't need to finish the thought. The sound of splintering wood came from the front door. They were breaking it down. Gideon grabbed an oil lamp from the kitchen table, his mind racing through their limited, impossible options. There might be one way, he said suddenly, but it means telling Elena everything, tonight, warning her before they can silence us permanently. She's at home with her children, Mercy said, her eyes wide with horror. They'll kill them all rather than risk exposure. The front door crashed open. Heavy footsteps thundered across the floor of the living room above them. They scrambled down the stairs into the root cellar just in time, the darkness swallowing them whole. But it would only buy them minutes. Then we make sure the truth gets out whether we live or die, Gideon said, his voice resolute. He found a small storage crate and pulled out an old jar that held a stub of a pencil and some scrap paper. We write down everything, and we make sure it reaches someone who can't be bought or threatened. Above them, the men were tearing his house apart, searching for the documents, and for them. But in the darkness of the cellar, the same cellar where Mary Brennan had once hidden for her life, Gideon began writing the words that would either bring justice or ensure their deaths. Gideon wrote frantically by the dim, flickering light of the oil lamp, his hand shaking as he documented every detail Mercy had told him about the night Sarah Brennan died. He named the men involved, the sheriff, the judge, the banker. He named his own grandfather. Above them, the searchers grew louder and more desperate, overturning furniture and smashing anything that might hide evidence. They found the cellar entrance, Mercy whispered, pointing to the thin line of torchlight that had appeared beneath the wooden door at the top of the stairs. Heavy boots clumped overhead. Gideon finished writing. He folded the letter carefully, tucking inside it one of the original documents from the well, the deed with the crossed-out Brennan name. There's a loose stone in the back wall, he said quietly, his voice a low rush of air. Where the foundation meets the earth. I used to hide things there as a boy. Heavy footsteps thundered on the cellar stairs. They were coming down. As the first man reached the bottom step, Gideon pressed the papers into the small, cold space behind the stone. He slid it back into place just as the torchlight flooded the small room. It wasn't much of a hiding place, but it might be enough. It had to be. The door burst open, and 3 men descended with torches held high, their guns drawn. Crane's face was grim with determination as he spotted them crouched in the corner. Well, well, Crane said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. The last 2 people who remember what should have stayed buried. He gestured with his pistol for them to stand. Did you really think you could bring down half the territory over some old papers? People deserve to know what happened to the Brennan family, Gideon said, rising slowly with his hands held out where they could be seen. The Brennan family is dead and forgotten, Crane sneered. Has been for 40 years, and after tonight, so will anyone who remembers them. One of the other men, the deputy with the familiar badge, stepped forward. His face was a mask of cold fury. My father built this town into something respectable. I'm not going to let some old woman's fairy tales destroy everything he worked for. Mercy looked directly at the deputy, her voice steady and clear, despite their circumstances. Your father was there that night, wasn't he, William? He helped them burn the house, with Sarah still inside. The deputy's face flushed with anger. She was trying to kill good men who were just doing their business. She brought her fate on herself. She was protecting her daughter. Mercy shot back, her voice ringing with 40 years of suppressed rage. Enough talking, Crane interrupted, his patience gone. We're going to walk outside, nice and calm, and then you're going to have an unfortunate accident. A house fire, most likely. Very sad. Very final. As they were forced up the cellar stairs and back into the wrecked kitchen, Gideon noticed something that gave him a tiny, impossible spark of hope. Through the kitchen window, he could see another rider approaching the house, but this one carried no torch. He moved carefully, deliberately, and seemed to be observing the scene rather than participating in it. The newcomer dismounted and walked toward the house with calm, measured steps. When he entered through the broken front door, his shadow falling across the floor, Gideon's heart nearly stopped. It was Thomas Morrison, Elena's husband, and the son of the territorial judge. "Evening, Crane," Thomas said calmly, his eyes taking in the scene, the broken door, the armed men, Gideon and Mercy, held at gunpoint. "Heard there was some trouble out here." "Nothing we can't handle, Morrison," Crane said, his voice tight. "Just dealing with some people who've been spreading lies about respectable families." Thomas looked directly at Gideon, and there was something in his expression, a flicker of understanding, that suggested he knew more than he was letting on. "What kind of lies?" Crane's expression tightened. He realized Thomas Morrison's presence complicated their plans significantly. "The kind of lies that could damage your father's reputation, Morrison. Best if you just ride away and forget you saw anything here tonight." Thomas stepped closer, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "See, that's where you're wrong, Crane," he said, his voice dropping, becoming hard as steel. "I've been waiting 40 years for someone to finally tell the truth about what happened on this land." The deputy stared at Thomas in shock. "What are you talking about? Your father-in-law, Judge Hemlock. He signed the abandonment papers. He's part of this." "My father-in-law is a corrupt old man who's been carrying the guilt of his crimes for 4 decades, Thomas replied coldly. "And my wife. My wife has nightmares nearly every night. Nightmares about a family she can't quite remember. About a house that burned, and a mother who never came back." Gideon felt his heart racing as he finally understood. "You know," he breathed, "you know who Elena really is." "I've known since the day I married her," Thomas confirmed, his eyes never leaving Crane. The birthmark on her wrist, the way she flinches at loud noises, the fact that she remembers things that never could have happened to the orphan girl she was supposed to be. He glanced at Mercy, and his expression softened with something that looked like gratitude. "I've just been waiting for someone brave enough to bring the truth to light." Crane saw the situation spiraling out of his control. He raised his gun toward Thomas, but Thomas was faster. The shot echoed through the night air, deafening in the small house. Crane collapsed to the floor in a heap. The deputy and the third man immediately raised their hands, their faces pale with shock, realizing they were suddenly outnumbered and outgunned. "The territorial marshal has been investigating irregularities in land claims for months," Thomas said, his weapon still trained on the remaining men. "He'll be very interested in hearing what you two have to say about tonight's activities, and about the last 40 years. Over the next hour, as additional lawmen summoned by Thomas arrived to arrest the conspirators, Gideon retrieved the hidden documents from behind the loose stone in the cellar. The evidence was overwhelming, implicating not just the original participants, but their descendants who had worked for decades to cover up the crimes. The mayor, the judge, the deputy, their world was about to crumble. 3 days later, Gideon stood outside the small schoolhouse where Elena Morrison taught her students. She emerged at the end of the day, her eyes red from crying, but her posture was strong with the newfound painful knowledge of her true identity. She was Mary Brennan. "The land belongs to you," Gideon said simply, holding out the original deed he had found in the well. It always has. Elena looked at the deed, her name, her real name, written on it in her father's hand. Then she looked toward the horizon, at the house visible in the distance where she'd been born. "My mother died protecting me," she said, her voice soft but steady. "She saved Mercy's life, too. The land shouldn't go to just one family. It should go to both of ours. I can't accept property that was stolen from you," Gideon insisted. "Then we'll share it," she replied, a small smile touching her lips for the first time. "We'll build something good on ground that has seen too much sorrow." For the first time, Gideon could see traces of the 6-year-old girl who had hidden in a cellar while her world burned down around her. "My mother would have wanted justice," she said, "not revenge." A month later, Gideon helped Elena plant a garden where the original Brennan house had stood. Mercy, vindicated after 40 years of carrying terrible secrets, sat on the porch, a look of peace on her face. The corrupt officials were awaiting trial, their power broken by the truth that had refused to stay buried. The old well remained open, no longer a grave for secrets, but a reminder that some truths are strong enough to survive any attempt to destroy them. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.